Okay, we have a call to order for the Bartlett Economic Development Commission for the month of February. Tony, may we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Nan Gutenkopf,
Present.
Tracy Smedilla,
Here.
Stephanie Ganzi,
Here.
Cecilia Green,
Here.
Jerry Cabasco,
Here.
Dan Gunstein,
Here.
and let's see, we're missing right now Joe Laporte, and who else? Another commissioner. We do have a quorum tonight.
First agenda item would be the, second agenda item would be the approval, or third would be the approval of the December 11th minutes from 2017 meeting. We have a discussion or a move to approve.
I move to approve the minutes of December 11th as presented. Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Motion carries. Fourth agenda item would be downtown incentive discussion. Tony, you want to lead the discussion?
I will start this discussion. As you can see in your electronic version packets or your print, if you printed it, this is quite a detailed memo. So I kindly ask to be able to go through the staff memo, and then Scott and I will answer all of your questions. There's a lot of information here, as you see. So at our last meeting was in December, at which time, also to note, Commissioner Perry's not present at this time, but it was asked of staff to enlighten the commissioners, particularly about tax increment financing and also other incentive programs that can be utilized. The discussion stemmed, as you recall, from a fairly lengthy discussion about the downtown business area. So first, I'm going to give some background on the current downtown redevelopment status. I'm going to run through some information about TIFs and how they work for those of you who may not be highly familiar with them, as well as some other incentive programs that are available and used by Bartlett and some other communities. So first of all, the current downtown redevelopment status, going back for the past few years, the village has found some success in filling vacancies throughout the downtown. As you recall, we periodically review the vacancy rates throughout the village, and sometimes specifically discussing certain business districts like the downtown, for instance, or Brewster Creek Business Park. And in this instance, we've been discussing for quite some time, specifically the downtown area. And just to name a few tenants that have leased space since 2015 include Arts and Bartlett, O'Hare's Pub, Delicious Crepes and Roti, and also an Allstate office, I should mention, in Bartlett Town Center. The largest new tenant in Bartlett Plaza has been the Ace Hardware that opened kind of in the middle of last year. Dr. Ackerman, as you see, every time you come down Main Street in Bartlett, of Balance Family Chiropractic, purchased the vacant building at 366 South Main Street. We've referred to it for many years or decades as the Borman Building. It was built by Dr. Borman and his wife and housed the original Bartlett Animal Hospital. So they built it for their own purposes back in the 80s. That building has since been demolished just in the past few months. And every day when we drive down Main Street on our way to work, we see the construction. Nan can see it very easily when she goes to her place of employment. So that's a new facility that's being built. I want to mention in terms of, insofar as incentives go, that Ace Hardware received a sales tax rebate and Balance Family Chiropractic received a permit fee waiver as incentives to assist with their projects. However, as we were discussing at the last few meetings, there's still some chronic vacancies throughout the downtown. Just naming the most prominent one is the 31,860 square foot former grocery space down the block in Bartlett Plaza. We've discussed Lucky Jacks and Platform 18 before. The former Tri-County Insurance Building is pictured here. That's at 370 South Main Street. And there's a similar cottage structure, an older, probably 100-year-old vacant cottage over at 143 South Oak Avenue. All of these have been vacant for a substantial period of time. There's good news, of course. I'd be remiss not to mention that the village's overall vacancy rate, which I hope to present to the EDC probably at the next meeting or two, information about all the commercial districts. The overall vacancy rate for commercial has declined by approximately half. I've mentioned a few months ago that approximately half of the vacant square footage in the village was in that one former Dominic's location. That also, if you happen to be driving by there lately or taking a look, you'll see there's quite a bit of construction going on over there right now with Amita Healthcare. So with some of those key spaces filling, most of the vacancy in the village is really concentrated among those older structures that I mentioned in the staff memo within the downtown district. So the question was asked to describe what tax increment financing is. And what it is, you always hear about TIF. People commonly just say TIF. And it's a very commonly used, highly effective economic development tool utilized widely throughout the country. Ironically, not in Arizona. That's the one state that doesn't utilize it. And it's used to attract and support redevelopment of areas that have been determined to require public financial assistance. In Illinois, there's over 1,300 TIF districts, so as you can see, it's used quite a lot in Illinois. Bartlett has 3 current TIF districts. One of them is called the Bartlett Corey TIF, which we all refer to as Brewster Creek Business Park. Bluff City is a TIF district, and we have an undeveloped TIF district at the southwest corner of Route 59 and Lake Street. Back going about 4 years now or more, the EDC spent about 6 consecutive meetings discussing and brainstorming about the downtown area. For those 2 of you who were present for those meetings, or I think perhaps Commissioner Smadilla was as well, we invited area businesses to comment, residents, and we took in quite a bit of testimony at that time. And the EDC ultimately came up with a list of 24 recommendations, one of which was to create a new downtown TIF district. And the long story short on that is after going through the TIF study, the TIF district was not created when it came to vote in the summer of 2015. So to tell you guys a little bit about what a TIF actually is, it's a process by which municipalities use a portion of current and future tax revenue from a clearly defined area to promote development and redevelopment of that particular area. So TIF boundaries are set early on in the process. I have TIF primers from the ITIA that I would send to you, and maybe be a little more detailed on how it actually works, but it's all kind of summarized in here. States vary widely in their rules for how and when a TIF can be used and how it can be applied. So if you look at the 49 different states, you'll see 49 separate TIF statutes. Illinois' TIF statute, which I've had more than a few opportunities to review, is about 100 pages even. And it's updated and amended frequently. So, you know, it's a very detailed statute of how it can be utilized. In the village's example of wanting to attract development or redevelopment to a stagnating or blighted area, the village would draw a boundary around the commercial district. You're required to complete a qualification study and then ultimately vote or declare the area to be a TIF district. When that district is adopted, future property tax revenues are split between the tax districts that ordinarily receive revenue from the area, and a new special fund is created, which is devoted to projects benefiting only the TIF district. So that's kind of a mouthful, but what that means is that on a date when a TIF is adopted, all the other taxing bodies will continue to receive the very same level of revenue from the properties within that boundary for the duration of the TIF. Any projects that are done that will increase the equalized assessed value of a property and thus increase the property taxes paid by a property, that's where the word increment comes in. If somebody's paying $10,000 per year on the day when the TIF is adopted, and then 1 year later their tax bill goes up to $11,000, the $10,000 is still being distributed the same as it was prior to the TIF being adopted, and that extra $1,000 increment is put into this tax increment financing fund. That's essentially veering off of the memo a little bit. That's essentially how $36 million in increment has been created and invested in the Brewster Creek Business Park TIF. That's paid for all the infrastructure and all the grading of that park is all paid for by the incremental increase of the property tax payments by those very buildings and businesses that are in that business park. Instead of being distributed to all the taxing bodies at this point, a lot of it's going to pay off the debt that was created. So I'm trying to explain how TIF financing works as clearly as I can, and would be glad to elaborate a little bit more on that later if you'd like. So any revenues resulting from rising property values are devoted to the TIF district, and this is the increment that gives the mechanism its name. Something important to note, there's a but-for test when it comes to creating a TIF. The redevelopment of chronic vacant and underutilized properties would not be expected to happen without the program. So, for instance, again, using Brewster Creek as an example, it was a depleted gravel quarry, and it was beyond reasonable expectations for a private developer to invest from $30 to $40 million in infrastructure before trying to attract businesses. Nobody can really do that. So there's a but-for test where it qualifies through a series of qualifying factors that are spelled out through the TIF statute, and those are the factors that are studied and documented when you do a TIF study. So when we did the TIF study, it came out to 50 to 60 pages done by TIF consultants who documented property by property, the qualifying factors. So this has been proven over the years in downtown Bartlett's case with some of these properties, because some of them haven't been redeveloped with purely private funds over a number of years. I'm going to point again to the vacant grocery store as an example of a property that could likely use some type of financial incentive. Some of the uses that can be done with TIF, by the way, I didn't number the pages, but I'm on the third page of the memo right now, near the top. Funds within the TIF may be used for things like property acquisition and assembly, rehabilitation and beautification projects of existing buildings, demolition costs, site preparation, infrastructure, interest rate rebates, professional costs, marketing the area, and that's just naming a few of them. There's a whole long list of TIF-eligible costs, but you can see by that list of the major items that I provided, it provides a large amount of flexibility. A community may sell bonds secured against the revenues expected to be paid through the TIF over its lifetime. That is essentially how the Brewster Creek Business Park TIF has gone. The bonds have been issued by a private company, Elmhurst Chicago Stone Company, who comes in several times per year for a payout from the TIF fund. They present their expenditures to the village board, and the village board approves the payments that help them pay off their bonds. So those bonds are actually privately issued. In the case of Brewster Creek Business Park, there's also what the village has done back when we had the first downtown TIF is a pay-as-you-go method, which has been more commonly used in the village. That's not issuing debt against future expected revenues. That's paying for TIF improvements over the years as the increment gets built up. At the conclusion of a TIF, which is commonly 23 years in Illinois, but may be formed for a shorter amount of time, or it may be closed prior to the full term, if the redevelopment goals are met, its special status comes to an end, and all taxes from the district again flow to the regular taxing districts that claim revenue from the area. So for instance, when the original TIF was extended by 1 extra year, it ended in 2010. At the conclusion of 2010, once that TIF was closed out, the much higher property values of the downtown that had gone up exponentially then started going to the taxing districts in the full amount, rather than a lot of it being put into the tax increment finance fund. So our TIF plans and expenditures public, anticipating some of the questions that are commonly asked. They certainly are. When a TIF is established, there are numerous legal requirements designed to ensure the public and other local taxing bodies are informed. Public hearings are held, and all expenditure decisions must be made in public by local elected officials. All documents pertaining to TIF are available through the Freedom of Information request, and I didn't mention it in here, but there's a joint review board that's convened to review potential TIFs, and then we review the status of all of our TIFs every year. It's in the state statute, and that board that convenes once a year, or when we're forming a new TIF, is called a joint review board, and that is comprised of one representative from each taxing district within the boundaries. So from being the person who has coordinated the joint review boards now for 13 years at Bartlett, I can tell you that we have TIFs in 3 different counties, and we're one of the few towns that when we do our annual joint review board, I send out letters to all the taxing districts within Cook, DuPage, and Kane here that are within Bartlett. One school district, but several fire districts and library districts and different counties and townships, of course. So some of the benefits of TIF: they help provide the ability to enter into redevelopment agreements with a developer, provides the ability to incentivize a new business willing to commit private funds. Really, I mentioned this at last meeting, it is meant to and intended to leverage private funds. It's not meant to completely put somebody in business or to incentivize a building project that maybe shouldn't be done, except for whether or not there was a TIF incentive. It's meant to fill in gaps and to pay for some public infrastructure costs and also improve appearances. When you talk about some of these older buildings or perhaps bringing them up to current codes. A lot of the buildings I just mentioned have various issues where they don't meet current building codes, accessibility codes, and fire codes in some cases. So again, I kind of rehashed some of the TIF-eligible costs: public infrastructure improvements, including roads, sidewalks, utilities, water, sewer, detention, parking, street lighting, acquisition of property, land assembly, demolition, and site preparation are TIF-eligible, rehabilitation of older buildings, kind of like I just mentioned, to bring them up to current code, and also to beautify them, like facade programs, correction and mitigation of environmental issues, which was one of the big TIF expenditures for the original downtown Bartlett TIF. Something that's not used quite as often, but is TIF eligible: job training, workforce readiness, and educational and training programs. And this is very general, but incentives to retain or attract private development. That can be some percentage of a build-out or offsetting architectural costs or something like that. Many of the nearby communities with traditional downtowns have TIFs. I'm not going to read them all, but many of them are in the area. Elgin, Roselle, Addison, Bloomingdale, Carroll Stream. These communities have utilized TIFs to help attract uses like grocery stores, restaurants, and mixed-use developments. I have another listing of some other communities that have it, but essentially a lot of the towns where you think of them having traditional downtowns either have one or they have other programs where they provide incentives. I did review a list of all the TIFs in Illinois to come up with this portion of the memo, and it is a little bit dated. It's from August of 2016, but that's where I refer to the 1,300 TIFs in the state. So there have been new ones since then, and of course, there have been a few that have been closed out since that time. Not to sit here and just tell you that TIF is the only tool that's available for economic development. I know Commissioner Smadilla and some other commissioners have asked about that in some of the previous meetings, and I'm going to go over some of them. One is fee waivers. This is fairly straightforward. Waiving various fees, whether it's building permit fees or demolition fees or water hookup fees or whatever the fees. Any new project or redevelopment project in Bartlett or any community, of course, will generate building fees. And fee waivers are one of the kind of smaller ways that some of the communities help incentivize some of the small businesses, like what we've been working on attracting into the downtown area. It's helpful because it reduces some upfront costs when you're getting a project going. And the village board recently utilized a fee waiver for the first time in some years. And again, for the project that I just referenced from Dr. Ackerman's new building that I watch incrementally built every day when I come into work, there's a little bit additional. Even in the harsh cold this morning, there were people up on the roof when I drove into work today. So the village board recently waived building fees that would have amounted to $19,182. I want to mention that because it's significant, and that obviously saves her, besides $19,000, some people roll a lot of those extraordinary costs into their financing costs. So if they finance that too, that's an extra $19,000 to finance over a period of years. So that was an incentive given for what is now our besides the new police station, the biggest private investment development project going on right now in our downtown. The general fund could be used to fund facade and business assistance programs also. The village could consider this as without creating a TIF district. This isn't as commonly done, but there are some communities that have done that. I don't know what the name of the line item would be, but it could be a specific line item and say something like economic incentives or facade rebate program or whatever the policy would be on it. And I do have some examples of that up here. The Des Plaines one actually is TIF funded, but the other one that's in the packet that I referenced that isn't. I did some research to see what communities in the area were just creating a line item for economic development incentives, and it's Mundelein that has that, started it with a $100,000 program that's kind of at the end of the staff memo here. Next one is called a revolving loan fund, and in my memo references that it's one of the oldest economic development incentive tools, but at this point in time here in 2018, it's one of the least used. Before a lot of these other programs existed, communities would, instead of doing a grant program, would create a revolving loan program. In this day and age, what I've found is the businesses don't always like that as much. Of course, anybody would prefer to get a grant to a loan, but if you're having trouble with financing, some counties in more rural areas tend to use these, and some of the smaller towns do them, and they're in small amounts, to be honest. Some of them only have $10,000 or $20,000 in the entire pool. Municipality would set up this fund, or a county would, or whatever organization. Sometimes it's a public-private partnership that runs these. And another one of the one of the challenges of it, of course, is it turns economic development staff into a collection agency. And as a person who once or twice a year goes and travels to do economic development ongoing certification training, and I've spoken with a few people who administer revolving loan funds, and that's essentially what it is. It's making loans to some small businesses that, for whatever reason, are typically unable to obtain bank financing or full bank financing, and it turns the staff in one aspect or another to a collection agent. A lot of these loans don't always, the businesses don't always go as well as they want to, and they're not always able to pay in as timely fashion as they want. So that is one of the down points of a revolving loan fund. The state of Illinois requires that for every $15,000 of revolving loan fund money loaned out, must create or retain at least one full-time job equivalent position too. So that's another challenge of this program. And as I referenced in my staff memo, if we ever went this route, since startups, and I'm going to say here at the meeting, especially restaurants, are really the most risky business ventures, the village would have to assume some level of losses if we ever went this route and did this type of program in cases where the businesses would struggle to make payments. The next one I want to talk about is a sales tax rebate. This is typically used throughout the state to attract and incentivize large big box tenants. So it typically is for larger projects for obvious reasons, because to generate a significant amount of sales tax to make this worthwhile, you have to be a business with a very large volume of taxable sales. So, this could be difficult to review on a case-by-case basis, I would say, for the smaller retailers and restaurants that we're trying to attract into our downtown. The village has historically entered into sales tax sharing agreements with large sales tax producers. One that ended about a year and a half to 2 years ago was the Home Depot. Came in on a sales tax rebate that ran for 10 years. The former Dominic's Finer Foods, of course, they've been gone and out of business for several years, but they did come in given a sales tax rebate from the village of Bartlett. Previous offers of sales tax sharing incentives have been thrown out there. Anytime I've called a potential grocer trying to get another grocery store in town, whether it was at the former Dominic space or the downtown box there at Bartlett Fresh Market, always kind of just throw out sales tax rebate from the get-go. But that on its own hasn't been sufficient to attract a big box tenant to that space, which is now the largest vacant space, and really in the entire village, really, when it comes to a commercial standpoint. The village did enter into a sales tax sharing agreement within the last year with Ziegler's Ace Hardware. And we crafted an agreement that rebates 50% of the village's share for 10 years or until the $50,000 threshold is met. And of course, we hope that their sales amount to a $50,000 rebate before 10 years pass. Property tax abatements is something else that can be entered into. It's used more for industrial properties in general throughout the economic development profession than it is with commercial or retail properties. Sometimes it's used in conjunction with another type of incentive when it does come to retail or commercial, such as a sales tax rebate. Keep in mind that the village only collects about 8% of the total property tax bill here in Cook County, verified with the finance director for the writing of this. So the village's portion of property tax isn't, the bulk of the property tax bill that the property owners are paying. It's primarily the school district and, of course, the other taxing districts that all together comprise the 100%. So, again, it's not something that's typically done in the greater Chicago area, but in some other states, when I've looked into property tax abatements, I see that occasionally it is entered into with another taxing district. And of course, the village wouldn't have any jurisdiction over that. I've never heard of anybody in Bartlett approaching another taxing district for a property tax abatement. But in the case of like an empty large box grocery store where their share of property tax could be easily into the six figures, well, if over 70% of that is to the school district, for instance, it is conceivable that a property owner or a business could approach another taxing district for a property tax rebate. But that's anyway, that's something that's not TIF related. And in some cases, the village also, of course, relies on collecting its share of property taxes, just like the other taxing districts do. Special service area, nearing the end of these, special service area is a taxing mechanism that can be used to fund a large range of special or additional services and or physical improvements in a defined geographic area. So it can actually be used for a lot of the same costs that TIF can be, but more in a marketing and a beautification sense, more so than paying for something like roads or infrastructure. It does have the potential to raise significant funds. When I did my research, I found that downtown Highland Park budgets $300,000 per year for improvements to its central business district through an SSA. There's a pitfall to this as well, like there are with all these programs. An SSA is comprised of extra property tax payments levied within the particular area. So above and beyond what your property taxes are today, instead of having the incremental increases go into a special fund like TIF, this is just an extra increase that goes into an SSA fund. So it can be voted down if 51% of the property owners within an area object to the SSA, then it shall not be created. So if we wanted to create an SSA in our downtown district, for instance, and propose an extra 2% property tax on every property, we would have to go to every town center, Bartlett Plaza, Main Street Plaza, every individual building, whoever is within that district, and they have the right to vote to create, to approve the creation of an SSA or to deny it. So you can see, why that could be a challenge in itself to create a new SSA. Cook County reclassification programs. From an industrial standpoint, while I've worked in economic development here, our village has done 2 Class 6B approvals. One of them, I'm going to ballpark it 5 or 6 years ago, was for the new Siebert Landscaping building on West Bartlett Road. And more recently, within the last year, the village board endorsed a Class 6B for the former Main Steel plant over on Devon, 802 East Devon. And you've seen, if you've had an opportunity to drive by there, you've seen, again, extensive work for months and months, a great beautification of the building, taking what was essentially a functionally obsolete property and bringing it up to modern code standards and amenities. It should be ready to go on the market, hopefully this spring. So Class 7 is a similar program, but it applies to commercial properties rather than industrial. And it's project-driven, I want to mention. You don't just carte blanche apply it to a building or to an area like you can do with a TIF or some of these other programs. It has to be based upon a specific program that's going to add value and employment and vibrancy to an area. The main property here within our downtown that I believe is appropriate for a Class 7, probably a Class 7B, which is, they delineate it in Cook County at the $2 million mark, whether before or higher or lower than $2 million. And the former Bartlett Fresh Market space at 399 Bartlett Plaza could potentially be a Class 7B location. We do offer that out, by the way. As a matter of fact, as Scott can attest to, I've sent Class 7B information out to 2 potential businesses or developers just this past week, one of whom may consider building a new building on a property within Cook County in the village, and another one who is interested in possibly one of these vacant buildings that I talked about and what type of incentive might be available. One point about the Class 7 and all the property classifications, that is property tax savings on the back end. So unlike some of these other programs, it's not any money up front, which, as you probably know, is what most of these businesses and developers are looking for. But this is a back-end savings over a period of years on one of the biggest hindrances of redeveloping the downtown, which is the Cook County property tax system. The last one I'm going to mention tonight is video gambling revenue. And I am definitely pleased to say that every time I look it up, it's higher. I've been following that over the years since the EDC recommended in favor of it and the village board approved it. And within the last year, the calendar year of 2017, the village has 11 establishments with 54 total machines, which generated $181,000 just in the village share of the revenue. So that's another potential funding source for one of these incentive programs, whether it would apply to the downtown or throughout the entire community. There's also an additional video gaming business that's been approved in Oakfield Plaza, where it's been a little slow going to start the construction, but I spoke with the business owner last week, and he intends on kind of ramping that up and trying to get open by the end of March or early April, called Olivia's Place. So a new and improved facade program could be created. It could include build-out costs, could be funded on an annual basis based upon the revenues from this relatively newer source of income. It's not brand new, but it's still a lot newer than more traditional sources of income. So, in summary, I mean, as we talk about here over the meetings we have, filling these downtown vacancies is always a high priority for the village board, for the EDC, for our staff, for our residents, for the other business owners, for the property owners. So that remains a very high priority. We have a lot of programs that we do that we go over here to promote our businesses and try to attract new businesses and investment. But kind of, I know we could talk at length over each one of these programs, but I wanted to kind of briefly touch upon all of them. And then following the memo, hopefully you got a chance to look at, I included something about the Mundelein Business Incentive Grant Program. Scott and I spoke with the Mundelein village officials at the last ICSC show to question them about this and get their information about it. And the way I could really summarize it quickly is they pay for a lot of things that would be essentially like appearance-related incentives that would help attract business, like facade program, helping pay for signs. One of the things I like about their program is they also will help defray the cost of architectural plans and things like that. It started off with $100,000 for a couple of years, and I've spoken with their community development and economic development people, and they're looking at increasing that program. Another thing I like about their program, why I included it, is they do it on a first-come, first-served basis. So, you know, when the program's gone, it's gone, but it can also help people plan for their, you know, try to get in line for next year if they're still going to do it. It's a relatively new program. I think they've been running it maybe 3 or 4 years at this point. But you can see they do commercial building improvement grants and sign replacement grants. They have all kinds of different eligible costs: mechanical, electrical, infrastructure, security systems, parking lots. I'm not going to read the whole program to you, but it's a very wide-ranging program, and it's fun. It's mostly utilized in their downtown, and it's not a TIF program. So when I was doing my research for this memo, coming up with other programs that aren't dependent upon TIF, this was one of the ones that kind of jumped out at me. So I just spoke for 40 minutes straight about these incentives, and hopefully covered most of the bases. And at this point, I'm ready to answer any questions, and Scott and I would be happy to answer any.
So currently, incentives are on a case-by-case basis. There's no program that outlines these to prospective businesses.
That's accurate. There's no formal program. I don't think I've had a week here in the last few years where I haven't been asked at least once or twice a week about that, and that's how I explain it. I said it's on a case-by-case basis. You know, explain that we don't currently have a downtown TIF or necessarily a formal program in place. But by the same token, some of those things like we talked about, like fee waivers and sales tax sharing, we bring up, you know, relatively quickly depending on what the project is. Case by case is a good way to put it.
Did Amita get any incentive to locate here?
They did not a penny. And it's one of the largest private expenditure programs or projects going on in the village. I mean, the amount's pretty high. It's over $25 million. Of course, Amita, being in the healthcare system and being one of the biggest in the area and one of the, you know, the one that's expanding the most at the present time. They have the financial strength, obviously, to do that. But no, they did ask if there was one, but not for a big healthcare facility that's taking a former grocery space.
Well, I appreciate staff putting together all of these options, and I think that as we continue the discussion of, you know, really throwing just about every idea up against the wall and see what sticks for the community. Why don't you guys fix this?
Bear with us 1 minute.
Meetings and I don't know, it must be Mondays.
Thank you.
I know it's no secret to some of staff, I'm not a big fan of TIFs, I think particularly in the economic conditions that we are now just starting to come out of. But again, I like these ideas. Thank you, Scott. I like the ideas that you've presented, and I think it would be important for us as an entire commission to maybe digest these a little bit thoroughly for the next meeting and perhaps redress our earlier discussion from December as well. But what I want to start with was the current downtown incentives that have been offered, and realizing that this has really been kind of a case-by-case or an ad hoc incentive non-program.
Right?
I think it would behoove us to start to take that data and have a better understanding of the type of business that's qualifying for this assistance, perhaps understanding what criteria the village is using to afford the business that type of incentive. Talk about what incentives have been offered to date. Maybe we've got some historic data going back. And I'm just looking at the 5 businesses that are listed on page 1 of this document. And so we know that ACE has received a sales tax rebate. Dr. Ackerman's Balance Family Chiropractic received a permit fee waiver to the tune of almost $20,000. You've mentioned Arts and Bartlett, Delicious Crepes and O'Hare. So I guess I'd be curious as to what those 3 smaller establishments received.
They didn't receive any. I was
No
just-
incentives.
Right, I was
No
just using that
support.
as a case in point of some of the current projects that have gone on within the downtown. I mean, Arts and Bartlett's already been there for a few years. Just that was more in the sense of some of the smaller spaces that have been filling within the last, well, since 2015.
Okay, so there's been no assistance
No.
provided to these 3 organizations? Okay, all right, great.
No. I mean, there have been other incentives given. Some of them a very long time ago. There was a grocery store called CB's that is in my economic development documents, a store that got a sales tax rebate but didn't last very long, and that was decades ago. One of the biggest sales tax producers in the village that came in on a sales tax rebate when they annexed into the village, not one person in the village would almost know that they're there. It hasn't really been open to the public. Welch Brothers with the concrete products. They've already been in for, I think, over nearly 10 years also, because their sales tax rebate is either about to end or just ended. So it's been a lot of sales tax rebates. There's one more. I know Jim's not at these meetings anymore, but when the Nest Cafe was originally built, and that building, as you know, is Tokyo Steakhouse currently, that was a very difficult site to develop, and the village worked with them to do something that amounted to over a $100,000 incentive, which was paying for the underground storage of the stormwater on that property. So again, something none of you would ever think about or know if you went to eat at Tokyo Steakhouse, but the stormwater for that property is under the parking lot, which cost, Jim would remember the amount, but over $100,000. And that was at a point in time where the village didn't really have any good family sit-down restaurants, and that was the #1 targeted business at the time. So that was the reasoning for why the village did that incentive. So there have been other incentives. I mentioned some of the more current ones and better-known ones. But those were, a good way to put it, like you said, Commissioner Smadillo, those were on a case-by-case basis.
So what is the split currently between Bartlett and between the existing taxing districts and the special funds that are created by the existing TIFs that we have?
I'm not sure I understand your question. What the split
Well,
is?
there's a comment in here. It says, within the TIF district, future property tax revenues are split between the tax districts that ordinarily receive revenue from the area and a special fund that is devoted to projects benefiting only the TIF districts. So we can use Brewster Creek, which is a very
Right.
fine example of, I think, a successful TIF district in our area. Instead of having a power plant, now we have dozens of businesses out there employing hundreds and hundreds of people. So that, I think that's a win, and obviously we use those TIF funds to develop and maintain and even improve infrastructure out there, which is great. So,
Right.
but let's use them as an example. How much? What is the split in that TIF to date? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I can tell you generally that the equalized assessed value of the entire area, the entire 600, well, it's 670 acres, it's split between 2 counties, but basically the EAV of the entire area was only about $3 or $4 million when the TIF was adopted in 1999. So it goes through 2022. It's really nearing the end of that TIF. So the taxing districts still collect the same amount of property taxes as they did before there were any buildings there at all,
So the
which is very negligible.
which is the 1999 values.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So all the, basically, when you ask what the split is, pretty much all the property tax money goes into the TIF fund. And just talking about the Brewster Creek TIF a little bit, you're right, it's a great example. It's one of the best examples of a TIF in the state. There were several years in a row, we've all been working here for a while, and economic development and through the recession, and there were several years where it was very challenging to meet the current TIF obligations. Very close, very difficult to do it. So I'm going to knock wood. Times have improved. There have been more projects, some big projects. So the tax increment is healthy once again. And so the split that you ask is mostly it goes into the TIF fund. The EAV for the current EAV hasn't been released quite yet. It'll probably come out within the next few months. We do our joint review boards typically in July or August. But the EAV is in the $50 million range now. And it's gone, and keeping in mind, an EAV is roughly equates 1/3 of what they consider fair market value. So it's gone from what they consider the whole area fair market value, about 10 million, to over 150 million. And I could talk about Brewster Creek all day, but there were some years, several years ago, when the EAV got up to 47 million, but then during some of the recession years, it went down to 44. Just 2 years ago, it was down again near 40. But last year I saw it, it was back closer to 50. And I don't calculate EAVs per se, but I suspect it's going to be closer to 60 this year. And maybe a lot higher, maybe 70. Maybe not this year, but soon.
Well, we can assume at least a 1,500% increase from 1999 when it was developed. That's a lot of money.
Accurate.
That's
Yeah.
a lot of money.
Yeah.
Again, because I'm suggesting that we continue the conversation of the value and the benefits and what some of the sometimes pitfalls are with TIFs. Can the commission please be provided with a report from the start of those TIFs and what those EAVs were to what the EAVs are today, so that we could have
Yes.
a better understanding as to what revenues are actually brought into those special funds, perhaps even how they're being allocated within the districts, and then also so that we have a better understanding as to those taxing districts that aren't taking advantage, or they don't have the benefit of those dollars going to them right now. I think that's important, particularly as we continue to suffer shortfalls from the state. I know that there's an important referendum coming up on the ballot for the Fire Protection District. There's been a lot of discussion amongst homeowners groups regarding them asking for an increase in their levy, and then certainly U-46 continues to be a burden on the village. So I think it's important for us to have an understanding of what those dollars are.
We have all those. I would like to provide the latest information, so I'll check to see when that will, I don't know if that'll be available for next month, but we have, every year we provide all that information. I had mentioned kind of earlier in the very long memo that every year we convene a joint review board, and then representatives of all the taxing districts sit up there, and I sit here, and Todd Dowden, and we report all the status of the TIFs, and we have all that information in terms of the original EAV, the current EAV, and TIF budgets. Again, as I referenced in the memo, it's all public expenditures. We're required by state statute to file it, and as a matter of fact, if we had a computer set up right now, we could go to the Illinois Comptroller's office and look at exactly how every TIF dollar's been spent in the village and any TIF in the state.
Great. I think, again, I think it's going to be a great discussion for next month's meeting, too.
Just so we're clear, you want, this particular agenda item was a downtown incentive discussion, but you want to see a broader base
I
of
think so,
TIFs?
and I think it's important. I mean, we still have, according to this memo, we still have 3 active TIFs, correct?
Right.
Okay, so again, we can agree that, and we can even throw the previous downtown TIF into the mix, just so that I think that we have a really good systemic understanding of the, the financial impact, both to the taxpayer and to redevelopment
Sure.
of the area and what the impact was. So if we look at success stories, maybe some that are still on the bubble, and then maybe even use that data to, dream a little bit bigger as to what we might be able to do in the future with the TIF. But again, much of that's going to come from the data that we have in front of us, something that's concrete. Again, exploring where it's done really, really well, and where it maybe we've had a little bit of a swing and a miss.
We'll have that.
So now can we go back to the downtown? And I'm sorry, is there somebody else, Dan?
I actually had a question regarding the downtown TIF that expired. Was curious, what were the benefits of it and how was it used before it expired?
Oh, my goodness, there were a lot of benefits.
Okay.
I know I had sent it since the last meeting, the downtown TIF closeout report. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, and I don't have it in front of me, but the benefits of it were major. I mean, first and foremost, if you just want to start with the town center, when that TIF started, they were basically going to be vacant or vacant, obsolete industrial buildings. Not only vacant industrial buildings, but they had quite a bit of environmental contamination in them. And the village, when I had mentioned that TIF funds isn't meant to completely pay for something, but to leverage also private investment and other funds, just using the town center as an example, the village obtained hundreds of thousands of dollars in EPA grants, and the village also spent a lot of TIF money to do environmental remediation of those properties. It took years. I mean, a TIF's 23 years. Again, Jim's told me this story so many times. It took the village nearly 10 years to acquire and clean those properties. So the village actually used TIF funds to acquire the properties. 3, Flex Weld, Setco, and one other I can't remember, acquired the properties, used TIF funds for demolition, obtained and got EPA funding to do environmental cleanup. We have pictures of underground storage tanks of fuel being removed from the ground there. For any of you who've ever heard about these EPA projects, they had to dig out nearly 20 feet deep of soil for the entire town center site, and then ultimately obtain clean fill for it. And it was actually through predecessor of the EDC, but I'm going to say, I don't know if I know Jerry was on it, but the EDC actually went through the process of selecting the developer, recommending the developer for the town center. So number one, the town center project. It helped pay for some of the infrastructure like the new road, Railroad Avenue, and a lot of the streetscape. If you ever walk down Main Street and you see all the sidewalk pavers, the pavers and the sidewalks were all done. There was quite a bit of infrastructure that was done.
Was it used for Savory's buildings?
I'm sorry? No, the TIF didn't
Didn't go extend that far?
extend that far, no.
Was it-
That building was built since I started here in 2006. It didn't exist then.
Yeah. Was it used for Toots?
No, it wasn't. Two Toots did get an incentive from the village, but it actually, one of the things that I talked about beyond TIF, it was right out of the general fund.
Did it come out of the TIF fund?
No,
Okay.
the TIF had recently expired when Two Toots got their $93,000 incentive.
I think Bartlett has its challenges because it's a divided county. So you have DuPage County and you have Cook County. What a TIF means to somebody in DuPage County is definitely means something totally different to somebody that wants to build in Cook County or Bartlett. The taxes in Cook County for commercial properties outweigh any benefit that it has. So to stay competitive, I think we definitely have to look at it as, revitalizing that TIF at some point or somehow to stay competitive with other towns, as well as our own town. Being it's a split DuPage and Cook County, I think it's important to definitely continue the discussion on that.
Good point, and not to forget about Kane County too, because Our third TIF, the Bluff City TIF, is kind of a mini version of the Brewster Creek Business Park TIF, former gravel quarry, and in Kane County. So when we do these joint review boards, we've got people from Cook, DuPage, and Kane, and there's disparities between them, absolutely.
Would you say that the prior TIF wasn't utilized to its maximum, ability? Could it have been better promoted?
I don't
Or was
think,
the
I think it did accomplish its
Did it?
aims.
Okay.
I mean, I had more to talk about the former TIF. I mean, we had a facade rebate program that, it did get some criticism because we would do rebates for things like parking lots, but a lot of things like that also helped the business owners and the property owners maintain and improve their properties, help them attract new tenants. And those rebates actually would come before the Economic Development Commission. We had a very thorough vetting process. That was one of the things that I would do at these EDC meetings, would be to review the rebates. And my predecessors before me did them. We used to do 30% rebates of up to $100,000 per every 3 rolling calendar years. So we would look at the calendar and go, okay, it's February 12th, 2018. We would go back 3 years and say, February 12th, 2015, how many rebates have you gained since that point? We would say you would be eligible for up to $30,000 within that period of time. And again, as some of the commissioners have been here for a while, remember, we had a lot of $30,000 rebates. And quite a few of them came in the last year when the TIF was extended. I remember this number because I've looked at it so many times. For the TIF wrap-up report we did in 2011, we did $840,000 of rebates. So I would say that was a successful program. One more thing I want to mention, again, when Gorski Plaza was actually expanded in conjunction with that TIF district. So some of the very spaces that we talk about now wanting to fill, the buildings themselves were built as part of a redevelopment agreement through TIF.
And CVS was part of that too?
No, the CVS was not. The Gorskis owned the lot where CVS is now located. The way CVS operates is a little different than some of these guys like Walgreens, and they do things differently. A developer who built the CVS owns that land and that building, and CVS, like Walgreens, enters into a 99-year lease. So, but the Gorskis did own that land, but they sold it.
Yeah, having lived through reviewing all those rebates, I remember you're saying that it was sometimes hard to get the business owners to even apply to it. You had to, make them aware it was even there, and then they had to do the paperwork, and there were people who could have benefited from it that didn't do it. And my observation, too, was that the TIF didn't cover enough. First, the business owner had to have the money to fund whatever they were doing, and then only getting a third of it back.
Right.
And it did not include build-out, which is one of the biggest costs of a new business starting up. If we do a TIF again, I think we have to make sure it's more comprehensive. And there was quite a bit of money left when that TIF expired. There was, it wasn't, why it wasn't utilized, maybe there just wasn't enough need at the time, but there were things that at the end you were able to fund, like infrastructure things with that money. But yeah, I don't know why a downtown TIF is such a hard sell. The others breeze through with hardly a ripple, and this one is a hard sell.
Hard sell. And you bring up all good points. I can only report from my perspective here from 2005. And at that point, it was very slow and hard to get people in
Right.
to do these rebates. And what I found was the more people got them and the more people heard about them, the more people wanted them.
Right.
And what the property owners started doing is relying upon it to some extent. One of the things I did like about it, even though it was a lot of roofs, fences, and parking lots, was that a lot of the property owners kind of baked it into their plans for their property. And they would plan, I'm gonna repair my parking lot in 2018. And in 2019, I'm gonna repair my roof. And in 2020, I'm gonna repair the fence. And it kind of went like that, where some of them would help, it would help them plan for their really maintenance. We expanded that a little bit, you're right, because people would ask for it for build-out, and it wasn't considered eligible for build-out. But I do want to stress that build-out, a community can create its own policy of what to use it for. And our prior TIF we had for downtown was what I and Scott would now call, and you would call, a very old-fashioned TIF. It was adopted soon after Illinois changed the TIF laws in the early 80s, and every town adopted a TIF like in 1986 or, thereabouts. And it was kind of a conservative TIF program, based upon kind of the way the TIF law was originally written. A lot of the towns now, like I didn't really reference, but I have like Displays programs, 5,000 grant for new awning, 10,000 grant, I really love this, for outdoor dining, 15,000 grant for build out, 20,000 for facade, and 50,000 grants, their big one, for, some major rehabilitation. So a lot of those programs are typically 50%, just so you know. I didn't look at every town, but if you look at 100 towns with these type of programs, you're going to find at least 90 of them are going to have 50-50 for their programs, maybe even 100.
Well, I don't want anything to get lost on the site that this is still technically taxpayer funded. And the reality is that we need to bring our elected officials into this conversation, as we discussed in December. Fred Crespo just had I don't know if it was canceled, but last Thursday, he had a proposed tax savings seminar over at Hanover Township, the Hanover Township Senior Center. And the bottom line is that we can take any of these programs, but when it comes to TIF, I think we have to realize, bottom line, that's ultimately, it's corporate welfare, and the taxpayers will continue to push back on this until somebody from Cook County comes in and helps support the businesses on their commercial property taxes. I'm looking at this tax sales rebate, for example. Ziegler's is getting a net benefit of up to $5,000 a year. That still does nothing to offset the high property taxes. I can't even imagine what the coin shop is doing, if they're able to even do anything for their customer base right now, and their property taxes exceed $30,000 a year.
Right.
So I think tax relief allows them to stay out of the, the shuffling game of maybe we apply for a grant, maybe we don't. And as you just admitted, you have businesses that are actually budgeting TIF rebates into their capital expenditures, which I have a problem with.
Point well taken. I mean, whatever your viewpoint of it or your philosophy is about these incentive programs, it's at this point, what I put before you tonight is kind of a basket of different incentives. Some of them are rebates, some of them are offsets on property taxes. I mean, one way or the other, it's got to come from somewhere. And remember that part of the TIF, for instance, is a but-for test. And even the Class 7 is similar. We could spend a whole hours dissecting and talking about the Class 7 program. It has very, very similar qualification criteria to a TIF. Property tax analysis, there's something like a but-for test on it. So that's what an economic development perspective is that it's something that if you don't have, you don't compete as much for the investment goes elsewhere. And the other thing is, again, there's like a basket of incentives here. It doesn't have to be a straight TIF incentive. What works for one business might not work as well for another. I mean, you're not going to offer a sales tax incentive to Balance Family Chiropractic. It wouldn't make any sense. Sometimes we're working with tenants and not even property owners. And, it can be used, like I said, for a number of ways. We might, if we ever get to that point, we might not want to have the type of program where somebody just uses it to plan for the maintenance of their property, but to offer like an actual incentive to a particular business to build out in a particular space. I think that's kind of how most of the communities are using it now. And the philosophy, if I may, is that like a small upfront $15,000 grant for interior build-out could possibly lead to increased employment in an area, reutilizing a space that's been vacant or underutilized for a long time. Eventually, if somebody gets a $15,000 grant to build out in downtown Des Plaines, ultimately, they are going to become a property taxpayer. It won't be challenged as vacant year after year. There's a lot of good reasons to do this as well.
Well, I agree, and as I said early on, I like the idea that you brought forth, a lot of ideas, and again, we throw them against the wall and see what sticks. I think just on the discussion we're having tonight, though, I think with more information, with including elected officials that have control over property taxes, I think when we bring them into this stew, I think we have the opportunity to create a more comprehensive plan for Bartlett businesses, whether they are leaseholders or property owners. And, certainly, as you say, they're always, everybody that calls in, they're looking for something. I think we do have the opportunity for a comprehensive plan based on what you've shared, with just tweaking.
On the video gambling income, does that just go in the general fund? It's not earmarked for anything? I know
Correct.
some communities do earmark it for certain benefits for the.
At this point, it's become another revenue source that goes into the general fund.
And how much, our share, the village share was 181. What does that represent in dollars of gambling?
I think it's only, I thought it was 3%. 5%, Joey's reporting
5%.
to the winnings.
Okay, so how many million of dollars in gambling went on
Quite a
in
few.
Bartlett to get you this
45
much
million.
money? How much?
45 million.
That's amazing.
And that's not just, it's $45 million played.
Played.
Right.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I think
Got to renegotiate the deal on that.
Yeah.
I think one thing's important to note about all these programs and incentives and the gambling and elected officials and data, I think all that's really important. But I think there's one thing that's also important to bring up is that we can plan and we can have all sorts of facts and figures, but working with Tony this last year, we may go 6 consecutive months without a bite on a grocery store, which is really one of the crown jewels of our community. Our residents, our board, I think our committees and staff and everybody wants to see another grocery store, for example. Like I said, we could go 6 months without any bites. We could get 2 days in a row where a grocery store calls. So we can have a plan, but we don't, sometimes it's hard to know what to prepare for. You don't know, Tony gets, hundreds of emails a week, and we field so many phone calls from so many different businesses. Few of them come to fruition. Some say, well, what's your tax rate, or what kind of vacancies do you have in a strip mall, or what is this land zoned? Is it a BR2, or what kind of zoning is it? But we don't know what we're going to prepare for. That's one of the challenges of that you folks face and we face as a staff. I mean, if a dry cleaner calls and wants to locate in the downtown, we're probably not going to put together an incentive package to bring to you or the village board. But if a grocery store calls and is interested and it's a national chain, well, guess what? We're going to bring something in front of our village board to talk about. So to prepare, a lot of the times it's the unknown, you know. So that's one of the challenges I think is important to acknowledge during this discussion.
Well, it seems to me like this 181,000 is kind of new money that we hadn't had before, and who knows, next year it could go down, it could go up since we're adding more machines. That would be an easy program to use that money for incentives for businesses. If we could create some program where we just use that, no matter what level it is each year, to give in grants or other incentives.
Certainly a possibility, but
Seems like an easy
well,
source of income to use for some.
it would on the surface, but like Commissioner Smodilla pointed out, the state just took away $480,000 out of the village's pocket recently. So that $180,000 is a little, it was new money a couple years ago, but now it's just trying to fill in gaps. But I think communities are taking the video gaming money, and some of them are looking into that. So certainly something to investigate, absolutely.
If I remember right, I thought the casino in Elgin's money profits were to go for education. I think it didn't quite work out that way, but a lot of places have, earmarked the gambling money for something special.
What is the outline of the existing or the new TIF that you guys or the city is looking to propose in the downtown area? Perimeters?
Yeah, we're not looking at this point really in doing that. It was Commissioner Perry, who's not here tonight, who asked for us to provide some TIF information and some background. And for now, that's kind of what we're doing. And that's actually from some of Commissioner Smodilla's questions, we're going to bring more of that back to the next meeting to just kind of go over it. I mean, it's something that we, sometimes discuss, but it's not something we're really pursuing at this time.
Because you guys are looking to get a grocery store, but one of the largest parcels of property that would be ideal for it is in Cook County at Stearns and 59, or at West Bartlett and 59.
Right.
And the question is, are you looking to propose, or is the possibility of a proposed TIF going to carry down into that area to make it more appealing, as well as possibly a Class 7 or a Class 8 to bring some sort of incentive to bring somebody from, let's say, building in West Chicago, Wheaton, into the Bartlett area on the Cook County side?
The answers to that were no and then yes, is that we haven't looked at that area for TIF.
Okay.
And this discussion was kind of based around questions in December specifically about the downtown area. So the original downtown TIF did not extend that far. It didn't extend to where Westgate Commons is. It kind of ended about, the 200 block of Railroad Avenue, kind of around where I think that Foot Doctor Massard's office is, might have been the last, or Dance Motions, one of those buildings. Again, I referenced the very many TIF laws and statutes on the book. You can't really jump. It has to be all contiguous, and there's so much just roadway and houses and everything between here and there. Never contemplated going that far. And by the same token, your second question of would the village entertain a Class 7 there? Absolutely. I mean, if a grocery store wanted to go there, first of all, you're correct, it's in Cook County, and it's the village's biggest undeveloped development site in Bartlett. And if somebody would come in and insisted on a Class 7, I mean, we don't approve it here at the meeting or me sitting here, but I'm sure we'd be pretty receptive to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that would definitely outweigh the negatives of putting that TIF in place on a piece of property, just the amount of sales that would come out of a second grocery store here in town.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to point out that it's owned by one of the biggest land developers that exists in the market, and that they've hired, I don't rank who's the top land brokers in the market, but basically one of the top 2 or 3. Tony Ganji at CB Richard Ellis has that listing. So, I mean, yes, have we contacted Woodman's? Have we contacted Meyer over there? Yes. Blaine's Farm and Fleet, yes. A lot, Walmart, yes. A lot of the big boxes have looked at that. They're aware of that location. Some of them just won't locate there for whatever reason, like it doesn't fit into their business plans per se, or they're not looking to expand in this area, or you're right, in some cases because of Cook County. That's a very, what's that?
IDOT and the reconfiguration.
Right, IDOT has plans to reconfigure and improve the intersections here, kind of one at a time. You've seen what they're doing over at Stearns and 59. That's going to happen at other intersections throughout the community in the next coming years. Last but not least on that is Crown primarily is in the home building business. So they have good connections, and they have their own subsidiaries really that build homes. So they'll more likely have some success in getting home builders in that area. And as I mentioned, they hired CB Richard Ellis to broker the commercial, just within the last 6 months or so.
Okay, thank you, Tony.
Yep.
Appears to end that discussion on the TIF perspective. Move on to the next agenda item, SVN Marketing Report from January 30th.
Yes, thank you. I printed this out and put it up there on the dais. You may recall back in, I think it was August or September, we were recommending to hire Sperry Van Ness to the EDC. We were looking for a recommendation to do so, and also to market some village-owned land this upcoming May at the ICSC convention. The EDC then recommended in favor of hiring Sperry Van Ness. As you recall, they had had a lot of success in leasing up a lot of our shopping centers, even some of our difficult-to-lease shopping centers like Oakfield. And so we went ahead and the village board hired Sperry Van Ness Landmark this past September. So Scott and I are in frequent communications with them. And of course, as our brokers, we want them to be working this site pretty hard. We asked them to provide a report that we could present tonight to the EDC and then pass along to the village board regarding their status or lack thereof in terms of what's happening with that property. So here's the marketing report from Sperry Van Ness. I'm going to flip through it quickly. You guys all know the property. It's 11 acres owned by the village at the undeveloped TIF, I might add, along the lines of TIF, completely undeveloped, and a TIF that's EAV is actually lower right now than it was when it was formed in 2004. So we very much want to sell this property. They provided the marketing summary of all the major listing sites that they use. LoopNet and CoStar is something that I access personally in my line of work, probably several times per month. And then there's a whole bunch listed that I've never really heard of. Crexy and Catalyst. They don't list it on Craigslist. I don't think they're going to sell this land on Craigslist anyway. But you can see that there have been quite a bit of views of it, close to 12,000 views of it. They are members of CCIM, which is kind of the licensed, highest licensure you can get as a commercial broker. You can see that they've email blasted it out to CCIM. They've done 2 email blasts. All kinds of, prospecting and reverse prospecting. In other words, they've been working the site fairly hard since they've had it. Wanted to bring this back to the EDC's attention tonight because we're 5 months already. Let's see, yeah, we're about 5 months into this contract already. It lasts 1 year. So they definitely have a financial incentive to sell this. And, You can see that they've done some analysis of recent sales. One of the things that we talked about with them recently, but we haven't done yet, is we've talked about possibly lowering the asking price. The village is asking $1.7 million for this land. And as you can see on the, what is that, the third page of their report, there's some other land in the area listed for $2 per square foot. The village's land is listed at $3.50 per square foot. They've done some marketing packages on it. As I mentioned, when we recommended hiring them, they're very active at ICSC. It's gotten my attention to partner with them at the show at Recon to put this in front of some more eyeballs. The village has created a video to promote this, and we're getting that edited a little bit further by the good folks at Comcast. And hopefully by next meeting, we'll be showing you the commercial, cable TV commercial that we'll be running for this land. So we're doing a lot on this ourselves as staff. Our brokers are. Didn't want the members of the EDC to think that we'd forgotten about this land and the brokers that you recommended that we hire. We're still hopeful that they can sell all or part of it before their one-year contract is up, which would be in mid-September. So here we are in the coldest days of February, and we're still working this and sending it out to people. I posted the video that Joey helped produce on my LinkedIn page and got almost 800 views on that. So there's people definitely looking at that site.
What was the last price change on that?
There has not been one.
That was the original established price?
Yes.
Who establishes it? Like, where did it come from?
Our staff did in conjunction with the broker, and then we presented the broker to be hired by the village board. So when we presented them to the village board, the brokers presented what they thought was a good starting asking price.
What's the floor on the asking price for this?
We have not determined that, but I'm going to piggyback on something that Scott just said in reference to possible incentives. I would say it depends. To use his example again of a grocery store, if a good grocery store wanted to go there, you know, the price might be more negotiable, but we haven't had any board discussion or internal staff discussion on what the floor would be. And also, I want to add to the EDC, just so you know, the village paid a price for this. So even though the price that the village paid at the time might be reflective of its current value, I mean, the village still has a considerable amount of money into this property.
Did the Go ahead.
How is the competition's parcel zoned?
Well, you know what, interesting you should ask. The village right now is in the process of rezoning this land, and their zoning is also zoned estate residential. However, the comprehensive plan for the village has it listed as commercial, and we've always viewed it as a commercial site. The village right now, as the property owner, is the petitioner to rezone the village-owned land from ER1, which is automatic zoning when something annexes into the village, to B4.
And that's for the competition as well?
No, they haven't rezoned it.
And I'm sorry, what is the competition zoned at?
That's zoned ER1 still.
It is, okay, so.
When you talk about that one particular piece of land.
That's
there's other
adjacent to
pieces
the
of
village land.
The best answer is there's a jumble of zoning there. It's mostly zoned estate residential. There's one piece of land that is already zoned commercial. Not the village-owned land. South of the village-owned land is zoned commercial.
Okay, thank you.
So do you know, have you guys received any activity from ideal prospects? I mean, I can see that they like sent the copies and a couple site visits, but has there been any?
We have not from what you would call the ideal, what we list as the desired hotels, grocery stores, car dealerships. Haven't had any luck as of yet with any of those. We did have an inquiry, somebody Scott and I met with, talking about resurrecting some residential type plans for that area, but not for the entire 11 acres, just for a portion of it.
So for the ones that did have interest in it, it looks like self-storage, trucking, manufacturing, and landscaping, could it ever change to that, like where?
Those are the same inquiries I've been getting on it since I started here in 2005.
If somebody wanted to put a hotel up and then put self-storage behind it, it would certainly be open.
Yeah, I like, Scott always says that, that's true. If they want to do a hotel and self-storage, that sounds good.
One good, one bad.
Self-storage necessarily on its own.
I'll just live in a self-storage.
Do you know if IDOT has come forward with a redevelopment plan at that intersection yet?
I'm sorry, has
Has
IDOT?
IDOT come through?
Yes. Oh, yeah, they spent many months, they spent years.
When is that going to be implemented? And are the plans?
I would have to defer to Jim, who's not here. He would say that later this year, I think.
And is
I
it going to
think they're
affect,
letting
is it
out-
going to affect the access to this property positively?
Well, it's not going to affect the access to that property. I've looked at it enough to know that. They would be putting an extra clover leaf on the, I want to say it's on the east, southeast corner of it, I believe. Yeah. And the access for this particular point, I mean, there would be widening going on, but not additional access to it.
Okay. I was just curious if there was a site redevelopment plan that could be implemented with
There
this
is.
to positively increase the, the interest in this. Because I think that's one of the chicken or the egg, which one came first,
That's
that's.
a good point.
Just
I
something-
haven't looked at it for a long time, but that's what I recall seeing as an extra clover leaf on the Bartlett side of it, which is on the south end of that intersection, and on,
The old motorcycle gang?
yeah, there was snowmobiles and just some vacant land, really, but, yeah, an extra clover leaf and some widening of it.
Okay.
In my electronic archives, I have a copy of it.
The reason I say that is just when IDOT comes in, they tend to increase people's perception of, the investment that IDOT puts into that intersection. And now the larger developers come in and say, wow, they're putting $60 million infrastructure in, maybe we should take a second look at that.
I agree with that. I think that could build some momentum and some interest in that site. I mean, it's all the way, that goes into how we market things.
Okay.
Village-owned site, at new improved intersection, exclamation point. I mean, when they start doing that, if SVN is not successful in selling this piece of land in the next 7 months, and around that same time, the improvements are being made, that would be our next tact in terms of marketing the site. Kind of stressing the improvements that the state's making to it.
Yep.
Long time coming, I might add.
Very much so. And the other thing, I saw the improvements that they did at McLean Boulevard. And if you drive down McLean Boulevard, if they're doing anything particularly the same to this intersection, it by far is going to enhance the perception of this whole area here. So,
Right, I just drove that way a week or two ago and drove through that and saw it. So that's a good
you did a nice job.
point.
And when do you guys anticipate lowering the price on it?
It's just something Scott and I have just started discussing. I mean, we'd have to bring that up to others, the administrator, and make sure that, we're not just deciding to lower the price, but that we think it might draw some additional interest. So we haven't done that yet. Hope to tell you that we have, within the next couple of meetings, or at least prior to the ICSC show.
I haven't been past there. Did you guys put up a large for sale sign?
We did. Well, Sperry Van Ness did.
They did? And did they cut the trees down, or was that part of your?
There was some scrub brush over there. I don't think they cut anything down over there. There were some
It looks,
wayward bushes in the area.
looks nice and open now. It looks like it's ready for a developer to come in, so.
I'll just make my one comment on the pushback you're getting on Cook County location due to labor regulations and taxes.
It's true.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Move on to the next to last item on the agenda, be new business and/or public comment, which I doubt we'll have any.
Just actually going to turn this over to Nan, but quickly will mention, because a lot of the economic development commissioners have visited me over the years when I stand at the Bartlett table at the 5-Star Expo, which is this Friday. And for more commentary on this exciting business and health expo, I'm going to turn it over to Nan Gutenkopf.
You prepared a little flyer here, which was nice of you, but it is this Friday from 10 to 3, and I encourage you to go and maybe spread the word. Bartlett wasn't in it last year, but we're back again, so we like to show a presence that people attend from Bartlett, and we're glad that Tony's going to be there, and so it would be nice to see everyone there.
There's always a lot of good food vendors that we enjoy, and I can't recall exactly all of them, but I know last time I was there, O'Hare's was there, and Moretti's from Bartlett. Craig Ochoa's business, I think, was there, year number 1. And
Yeah, I don't think he's here this
there
year.
were a few other businesses. I think there were 5 or 6 Bartlett businesses there last time.
For sure, there is this year too.
Yeah. And just wanted to mention it's this Friday, if you want to stop by and say hi.
It's at Medina Shrine, which the address is on here. And we have a blood drive, so if you're feeling generous.
I'm sorry.
That would bring us to the next and last agenda item, which would be adjournment. If anybody's interested in making a motion to do so. All in favor? Aye. Meeting is adjourned, officially adjourned.
Thank you.